The story of a foreign wrestler who comes to Mexico and becomes a bigger star than in his home country is not new. Many luchadores have found in Mexico a safe haven and a new start when their careers had been stuck in other places. But the story of a man from the other side of the world who comes to Mexico before his first match, without a relative that was a luchador, without fame, without knowing the language, and without money, is not so common. But that's precisely the story of the man I'm about to share with you. Today in Let's Talk Lucha, we'll take a look at the last dragon in Lucha Libre, Ultimo Dragon. Yoshihiro Asai was born on December 12, 1966 in Nagoya, Japan. Right away, these two facts that someone might pass by foreshadow the relationship that Asai would end up having with the country that would make him famous. Yes, I'm talking about Mexico. December 12, his birthday in Mexico is one of the biggest religious holidays, uniting millions of Catholics who celebrate the day of La Virgen de Guadalupe. And his home city Nagoya in 1978 signed an agreement with Mexico City to become sister cities, beginning a relationship focused on cultural, technological, and economical exchange. Asai's childhood was difficult. He has shared that both his parents had some type of disabilities, and money was very tight. This made the situation at home a struggle for his parents and his siblings. Still, he has said that despite the difficulties, he lived a happy childhood, even working delivering newspapers every morning to cover his own expenses. Asai's first contact with wrestling was when he saw Antonio Inoki on TV when he was a kid. He fell in love with the sport when he saw what the men on his TV could do in a ring, having impressive bodies and strength similar to the cartoon heroes he was used to seeing in other shows. He already loved wrestling when one day, not in a wrestling TV program but in a children's show, he saw a masked man who would become his ídolo. This man used a máscara and had a superhero physique. His name? Mil Máscaras. As you probably know, Mil Máscaras is a luchador that was huge in Japan, and he has inspired many people to become wrestlers. Asai was one of them. The other masked wrestler that caught his attention was Tiger Mask. After seeing these two wrestlers, now considered legends, Asai made up his mind. He wanted to be a luchador. Asai was resolved to become a wrestler, but he had always been a kid prone to being sick. Inspired by Antonio Inoki, whom he had heard had been in a similar situation, he first trained track and field to get in shape. He also trained judo for 3 years as a replacement for amateur wrestling. And this was because he couldn't find a place in his city to train the latter. Now in better physical shape and having finished high school, he was determined to train to become a professional wrestler. To do this, he had to leave his hometown and head to Tokyo, the only city back then in Japan where one could train to become a professional wrestler. Once in Tokyo, he went to the New Japan Pro Wrestling offices to ask for an opportunity. They asked for his height and weight because they had their minimum requirements, which for height were 1.8 meters or 5 feet 10 inches, and for weight 80 kilos or 176 pounds. The thing was that Asai was 1.7 meters tall, 5 feet 6 inches, and he was still a skinny young man. Of course, he knew the requirements and he lied in the moment. Once he arrived to his first training session, the coach noticed the inconsistencies between paper and person, but he still let him train. This first training was sort of a test, and while he did all the demanding exercises and he was confident he would get accepted, days later he was notified that he was rejected from the program for being too small and too light. Asai was sad but determined, so he went every day to see the coach and ask for a chance. And every day he was rejected. At the time, he worked at a shop where he would talk to a customer that would visit often. One day he explained the situation and his frustration. This customer actually knew someone in New Japan's gym, and he wrote a letter asking this person to let Asai train with them. Just like that, he was back on track to become a professional wrestler. After some time training and without having debuted, one of the coaches asked Asai if he would like to go to Mexico. He said he could get him in contact with the people of the Universal Wrestling Association, the UWA. This promotion was huge in Mexico, being the first rival of the CMLL, and seeing the biggest legends of Lucha Libre and wrestling come through its ranks. Asai was excited. Of course he wanted to go to Mexico, the home of those colorful luchadores he had seen so many times. But before he went to Mexico, he was sent to train with the Gran Hamada, a legendary figure of Mexican and Japanese wrestling. You could say he was someone who served as a bridge between both countries and for many luchadores, teaching Japanese wrestlers the lucha style and luchadores the Japanese style of wrestling. But in the case of Asai, he actually spent most of his time with Gran Hamada playing with slot machines. Asai has said that Gran Hamada loved this type of games, and whenever he asked Hamada about his training to prepare to go to Mexico, Hamada would simply say, "You'll learn Lucha Libre once you get there." Asai understood Gran Hamada was a natural, and to him it might have seemed easy, but he was scared of going to Mexico without actually knowing what to do in the ring. That feeling increased once he knew who he would face once he arrived to Mexico. A trio well known in Japan because of how rudo and tough they were. He was scheduled to face the Missionaries of Death, Los Misioneros de la Muerte. After getting lost because no one picked him up at the airport, he finally was able to debut in 1987 in the city of Pachuca, in a show of the UWA against the aforementioned Misioneros de la Muerte, which included El Tejano, Negro Navarro, and El Signo, and he teamed up with 2 other Japanese wrestlers. He debuted using his last name Asai and without a mask. In this company, he would become world welterweight champion a few times. Of course, he would become part of the roster for the company, and he would end up visiting Japan with the UWA as well. In 1991, Asai received a call that would change his life forever. A booker who worked for the CMLL had seen him wrestle, and he wanted to add Asai to the roster of luchadores. The booker was the visionary Antonio Peña. He told Asai he wanted to recruit him, but he needed to change his character. So far, Asai had wrestled using his real last name, and usually only used simple black trunks. But Peña had an idea. Likely based on the 1985 movie The Last Dragon, he wanted Asai to put on a mask and gear that resembled a dragon, and he gave him the name Ultimo Dragon, the Last Dragon. Asai said he liked the idea, but he wanted to be a tiger, not a dragon. He loved tiger mask, and being something similar but in Mexico was something he dreamed of. Peña explained that in Mexico, people don't really associate tigers with Asia, and that a dragon would immediately command the idea of martial arts for fans in Mexico. Asai trusted him, and after making some changes to the mask and gear, he was satisfied with the concept. El Ultimo Dragon had been born. Asai has said that the change in character truly changed his life, and that in just a few weeks after last wrestling under his previous name and now being Ultimo Dragon, he was making 20 times more money per match. He was paired up with Octagon, another martial artist character that back then was one of the biggest stars in the country, so he immediately was put in the main event scene. He was so popular that in 1992 CMLL came up with his mini version, Ultimo Dragoncito, a sign of how big he had become. During his time in the CMLL, he wrestled against and alongside the biggest stars of the company: Felino, Negro Casas, Sangre Chicana, Vampiro Canadiense, Atlantis, Dr. Wagner Jr., and many more. He would also become NWA middleweight champion, and in 1995, he would face a Canadian talent that you may be familiar with, Corazón de León, also known as Chris Jericho. On March 17, 1995, Ultimo Dragon defended the NWA Middleweight Championship against Corazón de León at the Cathedral of Lucha Libre, the Arena Mexico. This was a 2 out of 3 falls match, and even though both were foreigners, fans took Dragon as the local, and they supported him in his title defense. Corazón de León took the first fall after wearing down Dragon with many locks and finally splattering Dragon's face on the canvas. The second fall started with Corazón de León dominating Dragon, but once Dragon caught his breath again, he quickly took care of him using his speed. Before Corazón de León knew it, Dragon put him in a puente suplex and he won the second fall. As it usually happened in Lucha Libre, the third fall was the most interesting one, with both luchadores applying their best locks and moves and countering each other at every opportunity. Many times during this fall, it seemed like Corazón de León was taking the win, but every time, Dragon broke the pin in the last moment. Finally, after countering Corazón de León into a powerbomb from the corner, Ultimo Dragon was able to beat him and retain the championship. Between 1995 and 1998, Corazón de León and Ultimo Dragon would see each other in Mexico, the United States, and Canada in many promotions, pleasing the crowd every time they faced each other with their charisma and skills. When Antonio Peña left the CMLL to create AAA in 1992, he didn't call Ultimo Dragon to join him. But in 1996 he did call him and he would wrestle for AAA but for a very short time. This was because he soon got the call to go to the United States and wrestle at WCW. Once he arrived to WCW, he was called Ultimate Dragon for almost a year because of a mistranslation. But after that period, he was called Ultimo Dragon once again. In that promotion, he was paired with a manager called Sonny Ono, arriving as a heel because of this pairing. In his debut, he faced none other than Rey Mysterio Jr., another luchador who had left AAA to go to WCW. He impressed everyone in his first and following matches, proving that his height and weight, once considered weaknesses, had been turned into his biggest strengths. Ultimo Dragon had been alternating work in Mexico and Japan, and he still did it during his time in WCW. And in 1996 he became J-Crown champion in Japan. The J-Crown was the unification of 8 different championship belts from multiple different countries. This meant that he was holding 9 championships at that point because he had the NWA Middleweight Championship as well. So when he beat Dean Malenko at Starrcade 1996 for the WCW Cruiserweight title, he became the wrestler with the most titles held at the same time, holding 10 singles championships at that moment, and he would add a 6-man tag team championship as well. During the late 90s he faced true legends of the sport, and still to this day, if you look up some of the following names on YouTube, you'll find some of their best matches were against Ultimo Dragon. He had great matches against and alongside Rey Mysterio Jr., Eddie Guerrero, Chris Jericho, Dean Malenko, Steven Regal, also known as William Regal, The Great Sasuke, Yoshin Thunder Liger, Psychosis, El Dandy, El Negro Casas, La Parca, Octagon, El Hijo del Santo, Dr. Wagner Jr., and many more. In 1998, Ultimo Dragon injured his left arm, and as a consequence of a bad surgery, part of his left forearm was left without any muscle and thus without strength. For close to 5 years he was unable to wrestle and he went back to Japan. It was during this time that he started a wrestling school, sharing with the Japanese youth everything he had learned. He would end up having more than 200 students, and you probably have heard of at least one of them, current AEW wrestler Kazuchika Okada. Sadly, he would stop teaching after one of his students died after fading away in the middle of the ring in a training session. The student had previous medical issues, but for Ultimo Dragon, it was devastating. He finished training that generation of wrestlers and he wouldn't do it again. In 2002, Ultimo Dragon had another surgery which allowed him to go back to train Lucha Libre. In 2003, the WWE sought him, looking to replicate the phenomenon that had been seen with Rey Mysterio. Dragon went to the company and he wanted to fulfill 2 big dreams of his. He wanted to wrestle in the Madison Square Garden and he also wanted to be part of the biggest wrestling show in the world, WrestleMania. On June 26, 2003, the first of his 2 dreams came true when he made his TV debut in SmackDown, which took place in Madison Square Garden. During his first months, he would face old rivals like Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio, but he wasn't seen on TV for a while after that. Luckily for him, he would take part of a Cruiserweight Open at WrestleMania 20, which took place in Madison Square Garden as well. His entrance is remembered by a lot of fans because he tripped with his cape just when he was coming out, and he would actually wrestle for less than 4 minutes before being eliminated by Jamie Noble. That same year, 2004, Ultimo Dragon left the WWE, not having the same impact as in WCW, but having fulfilled his lifelong dreams. After that, Ultimo Dragon traveled all around the world, showing everyone who faced him that he still had a lot to give. In Japan, he even took on another mantle, leaving Ultimo Dragon's name and mask aside and becoming the Tiger 2. Using the mascara of Tiger Mask. He would eventually go back to his most famous character, and still to this day, he travels to Mexico and the United States to have exhibition matches. Yoshihiro Asai, Ultimo Dragon, proved that when the world closes the door, you have to keep knocking until the door opens or it breaks. He was brave enough to leave his home country to fulfill his dreams, and he was received by a nation that he had never visited, with a language he couldn't understand, but that shared his love for the sport that had enchanted him as a kid. The character he created alongside Antonio Peña became much bigger than what anyone could have imagined. Well, everyone except Asai himself. Tucked behind a mask he never lost, Asai gave life to the favorite luchador of thousands of fans around the world. And after 40 years of being an active luchador, Asai still thanks Mexico for receiving him and giving him everything. He learned the language, he learned the Mexican style of Lucha Libre, he understood what people wanted to see, and he gave us all he had. In return, Ultimo Dragon took the fans' respect and admiration. Maybe his name was inspired by a movie, but it tells the truth. There will never be one like him. He is and will always be the last dragon. Ultimo Dragon. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you like learning more about Ultimo Dragon. Now you can become a member of the channel to support this kind of videos. And if you like this t-shirt, you can get it at ltlucha.com. Let me know in the comments when you first heard of Ultimo Dragon. And follow me to learn more about Lucha Libre. I'm Eric and I will see you in the next video.